friends, and welcome to North Shore Whispers. Here, we revisit strange and often forgotten accounts, printed long ago in small newspapers across the American Midwest. Ghost stories, mysteries, disappearances, and other matters that were once considered highly irregular. So, if that's the sort of thing that appeals to you, you're certainly welcome to stay a while. So with that said, go ahead and get comfortable, and we'll begin. Story 1. They saw a ghost. The following account appeared in the June 20th, 1901 edition of the Ottumwa Courier, published in Ottumwa, Iowa. One Saturday evening, 3 young people walking home on the south side of town reported seeing something they could not easily explain. The incident took place at about 11 o'clock that night. 2 young women and a young man were returning home after spending time on the north side of the river. The group consisted of Mabel Burkhalter, Mabel Jacobson, and Roy Walker. The 3 were walking along the road laughing and talking, enjoying the evening, when they noticed a white shape moving slowly ahead of them in the street. At first, they thought very little of it. In the dim light, it looked like it might be a white horse, or perhaps a cow that had wandered loose. So, they continued walking. But as they drew closer, the shape became clearer. It was not an animal. It appeared to be a woman. She was dressed in what looked like a loose white nightgown. She was both bareheaded and barefoot, and she walked steadily along the road, as if she had not noticed the 3 young people approaching behind her. For a moment, the group stood still, uncertain what to make of the sight. Then, the 2 young women suddenly turned and ran toward home. Roy Walker followed close behind, and the 3 hurried together the rest of the way. When they reached the house, they stopped and looked back down the road. The strange figure had stopped in the middle of the street. For a moment it stood there, as though undecided where to go. And then it began walking again. The young women quickly went inside. A short time later, several sharp screams were heard, coming from the direction the figure had taken. Neighbors nearby heard the cries and gathered to investigate. A search party was quickly organized, and several people began searching the surrounding streets and yards, but they found nothing. No woman was discovered, and no trace of anyone wandering the road could be found. The next day, the story spread through the neighborhood, and the young women repeated their account to a reporter. Both insisted that what they had seen had been a woman, and that they had been close enough to see her plainly. Some believed the explanation might be a sleepwalker, someone who had wandered from home without realizing it, and who later awoke suddenly in the street. That, they thought, might account for the screams that had been heard. A search was made throughout the area for anyone known to walk in their sleep, but no such person could be found. One detail made the experience especially memorable. Just before the figure appeared on the road, the 3 young people had been telling ghost stories as they walked along. They had been laughing about such things only moments earlier. But the appearance of the white figure in the darkness left them with a feeling they said they would not soon forget. So whatever the explanation may have been, no one in the neighborhood ever came forward to offer a clear explanation for who or what was walking the road that night. Story 2. The Linkjoy House. The following account appeared in the March 17th, 1890 edition of the St. Paul Daily Globe, published in St. Paul, Minnesota. According to the report, a strange and violent mystery once surrounded a house occupied by a couple known as the Linkjoys. The pair arrived quietly and rented the property, giving little information about themselves. Neighbors knew only that they kept largely to themselves and rarely spoke of their past. For nearly a year, nothing unusual occurred. Then one night, those living nearby were startled by terrible sounds coming from the house. Witnesses later described hearing wild cries and shrieks of terror, sounds so unnatural that some said they resembled the roar of a furious animal, more than the voice of a person. Several neighbors hurried to the house, believing someone inside must be in danger. They knocked loudly on the door. The noise stopped immediately. From inside came a voice, assuring them that nothing was wrong. Those who heard it later remarked on something strange about the voice. Some were certain it belonged to a man, but others believed it was a woman. No one could say for sure. With no clear reason to force their way inside, the neighbors reluctantly returned home. But by morning, their suspicions had grown stronger. The house remained closed and silent. After repeated attempts to reach the occupants failed, several men forced the door open. Inside, they discovered a scene of violent disorder. Furniture had been overturned. Blood stained the floors, and marks along the walls suggested that someone had been violently thrown against them during a struggle. Yet despite a careful search, no one was found, and the Linkjoys themselves had vanished. No trace of them was ever discovered. The mystery surrounding the house soon gave it a dark reputation, and for years afterward, no one was willing to live there. Eventually, however, the property was rented again, this time by a well-known man, known only as Captain Adam N., whose reputation for honesty and clear judgment was widely respected. The captain had never heard the story of the house, but he and his family only lived there 3 days. At the end of that time, they moved out, declaring that the place was haunted. Pressed for an explanation, the captain finally agreed to describe what he had experienced. One evening, the family had been sitting together on the porch. The house stood some distance from the road, with a long walkway leading from the gate to the porch, through a row of cedar trees. As they sat talking, 2 figures entered the gate. It was too dark to see their faces clearly, but the strangers walked slowly up the path and seated themselves in 2 empty chairs beside the family. At first, the captain assumed it must be some kind of foolish prank. He spoke to the figures. They said nothing. Annoyed, he went inside to bring out a lamp so he could see who had intruded upon them. But when he returned with the light, the chairs were empty. Each member of the family insisted the figures had vanished the moment he stepped inside. The following evening, the same thing happened again. The 2 silent figures entered the gate, walked up the path, and sat down beside them. This time, the captain sprang forward and attempted to seize one of them, but instead of striking a solid body, his arm passed through something that felt like a blast of icy air. The shock caused him to collapse in a faint. When he recovered, his family begged him to leave the house at once. On the third night, he resolved to confront the strangers one final time. When they appeared again, he struck a match and held it toward their faces. The sudden light revealed something he said he could never forget. The figures had the swollen, discolored faces of corpses with wide, staring eyes and lips drawn tightly over their teeth. Though they looked unmistakably dead, they seemed to possess a terrible kind of life. The captain's wife fainted. The rest of the family fled the house screaming, and before morning, the captain and his family had left the place for good. He later said that no amount of money could persuade him to spend another night there. Story 3. The Sound in the Woods. The following account also appeared in the March 17th, 1890 edition of the St. Paul Daily Globe, published in St. Paul, Minnesota. Not all strange occurrences involve something that can be seen. In this case, what troubled those who heard it was something that could only be heard in the darkness. Travelers along a certain wooded road began reporting a strange sound that seemed to follow them through the trees at night. At first it was faint, something like a distant cry. But as people continued along the road, the sound sometimes grew louder. Those who heard it often described it as neither entirely human nor entirely animal. Some believed it resembled a woman crying out in distress. Still others said it sounded more like the harsh cry of some unknown creature moving through the forest. In several cases, the sound seemed to follow travelers for long distances along the road. But when they stopped, it stopped too. When they continued on their way, the sound would begin again, somewhere in the woods beside them. Naturally, many attempts were made to discover the cause. Groups of men entered the forest with lanterns and searched the area carefully. But they found nothing. No animal, no person, no sign of anything that could explain the strange cries. Yet the reports continued. Those who had heard the sound themselves often admitted that the experience left them deeply unsettled, and many afterward preferred to avoid that particular stretch of road after nightfall. What produced the eerie sound in those woods was never determined. Story 4. The Giant Ghost at Benton, Indiana. The final account for this evening appeared in the September 30th, 1896 edition of the Rock Island Argus, published in Rock Island, Illinois. One of the most curious ghost stories to attract public attention in recent years concerns an apparition reported near the town of Benton, Indiana. The first witnesses were a farmer named John W. French and his wife. One evening, they were returning home by wagon after visiting neighbors. Their road passed beside an old cemetery, long neglected and overgrown with weeds and brush. Years earlier, an elderly man who lived nearby had lost his life during a robbery for the small store of gold he was rumored to possess. Those responsible were never found. The old man was buried in that same cemetery. As French and his wife approached the place, their horses suddenly reared and began snorting in terror. The animals refused to move forward. Alarmed, The farmer reached for the shotgun he kept in the wagon, thinking perhaps highwaymen had frightened the horses. But before he could touch it, his wife cried out. Looking down the road ahead of them, he saw a figure standing near the monuments of the cemetery. It appeared to be a giant man, nearly 8 feet tall. The figure had a long white beard, and in one hand it carried a heavy club, much like the weapon believed to have been used in the long-ago crime. Slowly, the figure raised one arm and beckoned for the farmer to come forward. The two were too startled to move. The horses were trembling and pulling wildly at the harness. Then the apparition began moving toward the wagon. It seemed to glide forward without touching the ground. At last, the farmer recovered his senses. He turned the wagon around and drove the horses into a run, racing back to the house of the neighbor he had just left. Both he and his wife were nearly overcome with fright when they arrived. Soon afterward, another man named Milton Moon, known locally as a fearless and sensible man, also reported seeing the same apparition. Several groups of citizens attempted to investigate the matter, but though many people claimed to see the strange figure, no explanation was ever discovered. And in the years that followed, travelers passing through the old cemetery road sometimes claimed that they had seen something there at night. A tall white figure standing quietly among the graves.